June 30th, 1908, deep in the heart of Siberia, the world was about to change in a place few had ever seen. The morning began quietly, birds stirred in the trees. The sun rose through a thin mist and a quiet breeze passed over the taiga. But at exactly 7:14 a.m., the sky lit up, a flash brighter than anything men had ever witnessed. A streak of fire raced overhead, trailing sparks like falling stars. Shadows stretched across the ground as if midday had come too soon. Moments later, a thunderclap erupted, not from the earth, but from the air itself. An invisible wall of force tore through the forest with no warning and no mercy. Over 80 million trees snapped and fell like matchsticks, flattened across 2,000 square kilometers, an area larger than any modern city. A vast green world turned suddenly to ruin. Witnesses hundreds of kilometers away felt the blast shake the ground. Windows shattered, horses panicked, and telegraph lines went dead. The shock wave circled the earth, twice a ripple through the atmosphere, like a bell struck in the sky. Yet no crater was ever found. No fragments of space rock. No sign of impact, just scorched earth and trees pointing away from a vanished center. The power released equaled 1,000 atomic bombs. But this was 1908, decades before the first nuclear detonation. This was not a weapon. This was something else. A cosmic messenger had arrived unannounced and unexplained, leaving only silence in its wake. And in that silence began one of the greatest mysteries science would ever face. The Tunguska explosion occurred in one of the most remote regions on Earth, yet its impact was felt across thousands of kilometers. Those who saw it would never forget. 40 kilometers from the epicenter, a farmer named Semyon Semenov was sitting on his porch when the sky split apart. He remembered a flash brighter than the sun, then a heat wave that burned his face as if his shirt had caught fire. He was thrown backward and knocked unconscious. When he awoke, the windows were shattered, the ground still shaking, and a black cloud rose over the forest in the distance. Farther south, a trader named Ivan Petrov saw what he called a glowing cylinder trailing flames and smoke moving silently across the sky before vanishing in a flash. The event people who lived near the blast site spoke of the forest spirits screaming their reindeer fled, and they described the air as thick with fire. Their shaman declared that the land had been cursed. Many families left and never returned, abandoning their ancestral grounds forever. Across northern Europe, the night skies glowed for days. Strange silver lights hung in the atmosphere, allowing people in London to read newspapers at midnight. Astronomers in Belgium photographed mysterious clouds high in the upper atmosphere, unlike anything seen before. Railway engineers more than 500 kilometers away stopped their trains, fearing their boilers had exploded as the ground trembled beneath them. A single event in the Siberian wilderness had reached across a continent with no warning, no explanation, and no name. It would take decades before scientists would begin to understand what these witnesses had truly seen. For nearly 2 decades, the Tunguska explosion remained unexplained. A legend passed between hunters, traders, and local tribes, but ignored by science. Then in 1921, a Soviet mineralogist named Leonid Kulik read scattered reports of a strange explosion that had shaken the Trans-Siberian Railway like artillery fire from nowhere. He believed it must have been a massive meteorite impact, perhaps the largest in recorded history. If true, it could contain rare metals valuable enough to fund Soviet research for years. Kulik spent years seeking permission and resources to launch an expedition into the Siberian wilderness. In 1927, he finally set out with a small team into a landscape untouched since the day of the blast. What they found was unlike anything ever documented. Millions of trees lay flattened in a radial pattern, all pointing away from a central zone, as if something above had exploded outward. But the epicenter itself held a different mystery. The trees there were still standing, but stripped of all branches like blackened poles reaching into the sky. There was no crater, no obvious point of impact, just scorched soil and silence. Kulik drilled into swampy ground looking for buried fragments. He found tiny spheres of glass, traces of nickel and iridium materials found in meteorites, but there was not enough to account for the force of the blast. No large fragments were ever recovered. No meteorite ever displayed. Kulik returned multiple times, mapping the damage, taking samples, and documenting the devastation, but the central mystery remained. Something had exploded in the air above the Siberian taiga with power beyond understanding, and it had vanished almost without a trace. As the years passed and no meteorite was found, scientists began to propose new explanations, some simple, some extraordinary. The most accepted theory is known as the airburst hypothesis. A cosmic object, perhaps a comet or asteroid, entered Earth's atmosphere traveling at 20 kilometers per second. It never reached the ground. Instead, the heat and pressure tore it apart, causing it to explode in midair between 5 and 10 kilometers above the forest. The force of the explosion was equivalent to a nuclear blast, but there was no fireball, no radioactive trace, no human hand behind it. Computer simulations confirmed that such an event could create the butterfly-shaped pattern of fallen trees seen at Tunguska and leave behind only microscopic debris, but other theories refuse to fade. Some researchers suggest a chunk of antimatter collided with our planet and annihilated upon contact, releasing pure energy without any physical remains. Others propose a tiny black hole passing through the Earth, ripping space itself, and creating an invisible exit wound beneath the planet's crust. Still more believe the explosion was not natural at all, that it was the result of a malfunctioning alien spacecraft, or even a secret experiment by Nikola Tesla, whose wireless energy project may have unleashed a deadly beam into the Siberian sky. Though most of these ideas remain unsupported by evidence, they reflect something deeper, the human need to explain what we cannot understand, and Tunguska remains the perfect canvas for wonder, fear, and imagination. In the 21st century, new technologies brought fresh eyes to the Tunguska mystery. Satellite images revealed that the forest had regrown, but the scars of 1908 were still visible from space, the trees forming rings that matched the pattern of the blast. Ground-penetrating radar scanned beneath the soil, detecting strange anomalies and pockets of compressed material, possibly shaped by shock waves. Mass spectrometry analyzed tiny particles in the region, revealing elevated levels of nickel-iridium and even nanodiamonds formed only under extreme pressure. These findings support the theory of a cosmic explosion high above the Earth, one that vaporized the object completely, leaving only a trace signature in the soil. Supercomputers now run simulations that match the destruction pattern down to individual trees and the lack of crater to the physics of an airborne detonation. Agencies like NASA and the European Space Agency study the Tunguska Event to develop planetary defense strategies. They track thousands of near-Earth objects and use the Tunguska explosion as a benchmark for what even a small asteroid can do if it reaches our skies unnoticed. Global monitoring networks can now detect explosions anywhere on Earth in real time, but none so far have matched the power or mystery of what happened that morning in Siberia. The more we learn, the clearer it becomes that Earth was lucky Tunguska hit where few lived and not where cities now stand. The Tunguska event was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a warning, a reminder that the universe is not silent and Earth is not immune to sudden catastrophic change. Had the explosion occurred just 4 hours later, the city of St. Petersburg could have been at the center of the blast. Millions could have died. History itself might have changed. Scientists estimate that Tunguska-scale impacts occur once every 300 years, a rare cycle, but one we are already inside. That knowledge has driven space agencies to build early warning systems to scan the sky and search for objects that could bring another Tunguska without warning. But the legacy of the event is not fear alone. It is also the story of human curiosity and the relentless drive to understand. From Kulik's frostbitten expeditions to modern orbital simulations, each generation has contributed something to unraveling the mystery. And yet something remains elusive, a force that came from the sky without a name, without a trace, and changed the world forever. In the heart of the Tunguska forest, new trees grow among the shadows of those that fell, a living monument to the fragility of our world and the strength of our will to explore it. The explosion in 1908 still echoes in science, in memory, and in the skies above, waiting perhaps to happen again.